Okay, so words and phrases don't just express concepts, they also evoke emotional associations. So let's compare the words freedom fighter versus terrorist. Okay? Both could literally refer to the same group of people depending on your viewpoint. Okay? However, as you can probably tell, each evokes a very different association or emotion. To us in the United States, a freedom fighter has a very different feel to it as a term versus the term terrorist, which should evoke much more negative feelings for you. Okay? We can do the same thing in this next example, right? If we think about puppy, which I have that picture for you, right? It should evoke sort of a cute feelings of cuteness or love. And if you were to compare that to canine offspring. So canine offspring and puppy are referring to the same entity. Their referent is the same. Because canine offspring literally means puppy. But the word puppy means so much more to us than the term canine offspring because it evokes all kinds of emotional reactions for us. Okay? So linguistics refers to the emotional or affective meaning associated with words and phrases as its connotation, which is different to the denotation of a word, which corresponds to its literal meaning. So if I ask you for the denotation of a word, what I'm asking you for is the actual specific linguistic meaning of a word or expression. The denotation of a word tends to be shared across individuals because it refers to something that has a sort of a literal definition, whereas the connotation tends to be more sort of idiosyncratic across people, where people have varied experiences connected to the meaning of the word, and so the definition of that word, sort of the meaning that it conjures up, can be slightly different. Okay. Connotative meanings can also denote the non-literal meanings of words that are developed by a cultural group or a community. Right? So remember that connotation is going to be more personalized. Remember that terrorist means something very different to us versus to someone else sort of on the other side of the issue. So because our language and our culture are intertwined, right? Language and culture can never be separated. The word meanings are often defined by individual and cultural experiences. Both are elements that can be challenging to English language learners at any proficiency level. So if you think about an ELL may have all the knowledge that there is about how a language works in terms of the grammar, the morphology, the syntax. They could be familiar with the linguistic rules of the language, but if they're not familiar with the sociolinguistic and the cultural meanings that are attached to the words, right? Remember those 4 levels of meaning? If they're not familiar with all those different levels of meaning, they still will not be able to decipher the meaning of the words that are used out in a particular environment or context. This is the same reason that if you were to go to another English-speaking country, such as England, Australia, or South Africa, you may understand the language, but you might not understand what the people are talking about or referring to when you're speaking. This was an experience that I personally had when I came to the United States. I thought that it would be easier for me at school and sort of just generally in the culture because I came speaking English. But what I was unaware of is how different and how many different meanings the English had in the US context versus in the South African context, where words had different meanings and the cultural sort of the connection to language was very different. We can also think about terms such as the sunglasses are very cool, right? That's an example of a connotation which, if it's not explained to an ELL, may sound pretty odd, right? As in the sunglasses are cold. Or if somebody said, the biggest loser. So normally the biggest loser would be something that is very negative. Okay, it's a negative statement. But in the US, we know that there's a program about weight loss that's called The Biggest Loser. And in that particular context, it is a positive thing to be the biggest loser, right? You want to lose the most weight. And so here are some examples just showing you how the meaning of phrases and words can be different based on our context, and how you as teachers of English language learners really need to be specific about these different layers of meaning. So let's talk a little bit more about literal versus metaphorical meaning. What are some of the references that you conjure up in your head, in your mind, when you hear the word heavy? Some people might think of a big weight or something that is tough to carry. Basically things that are a struggle to move or represent something large or dense. Okay? So now that we have that meaning in our mind, let's think about the sentence, she left with a heavy heart. So how do we go about understanding a sentence like that? If we think about hearts not being literally heavy, but sort of like the abstract idea around a heavy heart, we can interpret the meaning of the sentence to metaphorically mean something sad, right? So in metaphor, the meaning of the word that is used, that the piece of the sentence that is not literal, right, that's figurative, that meaning is extended beyond its primary sense to describe reference that bears similarities to the word's primary referent. Okay, so if you think about this example, we are meant to see the similarity between the heavy objects, right, or that denseness or that struggle, and the heart, right? Because in this sentence, heavy is being used to describe the heart. It's the adjective describing the noun. So just like a heavy object, which is a great weight and which is sort of a burden and it's hard to support, that's the meaning that we're deriving and we're sort of placing onto heart when we say she left with a heavy heart. So this person is carrying around a large emotional burden is sort of the meaning there. So as speakers, we create metaphors rather spontaneously. Our addressees are able to comprehend these metaphors by working out the points of similarity between the events or the entities we're referring to in the metaphor. So metaphorical meanings are compositional, right? The meaning is derived from the sentence because we use the literal meaning of the words in that sentence to create the comparison. And the other thing that I want you to remember is that metaphorical meanings are common in everyday speech, but they also vary from culture to culture. Metaphors are sayings that help us analyze, categorize, and make sense of our world. And because they're very specific to culture, they metaphors are different in different cultures because the people in those communities assign a significance to the words, and also it gives us a snapshot into how the culture is representing their worldview, their perspective. Metaphors in cultures exist to illustrate an important attribute that is valued in that particular setting, to illustrate and to teach a moral lesson. So let's think about some of the metaphors that were discussed in your reading. Okay, time is money. Time is money is a familiar metaphor in American English. So time is money is a familiar metaphor in American English. It tells us about the role of time in American culture, right? And we can think about questions like, is time something that we value? And how can you tell that we value time in the American culture? Efficiency is also something else that we value. So let's look at these other metaphors about time. Each one is said by people of different cultural backgrounds. Now, although time is money, is a metaphor that distinctly reflects American culture, you can't really generalize metaphors to specific countries, such as, for example, time is a prison, which was something that was said by a Russian writer, Vladimir Nabokov. So you can't really say that someone who's Russian has this outlook, right? It can't be generalized in that way, but it does tell us something about that culture and the way that generally people may perceive the world. Here's some other metaphors. Okay. So time is a gypsy. So somebody who's saying that time is a gypsy, what they're saying is that they're taking the meanings that we associate with gypsy, right? Somebody who moves around a lot, that doesn't necessarily belong to anywhere. And they're taking those meanings and they're adding them onto time. They're using them to describe time. So when you say time is a gypsy, what you're trying to say is that time keeps moving, perhaps. Here's another one, time is a trap, right? And that's by a Canadian author. Time is a river, right? So it keeps flowing, by an American journalist. Time is a teacher. So it says, time is a great teacher, but unfortunately it kills all of its pupils. So time is something that we learn from. Okay? So notice how all of these are metaphors, and the way that metaphors work is by assigning the meaning that that is contributed by one word to the rest of the sentence, or to the rest of the terms in the sentence. Now we're going to talk about idiomatic meanings, or idioms, which are very different to metaphors. We've learned so far that we can interpret the meaning of a sentence by paying attention to the word order of the sentence and the linear and hierarchical relationships between the phrases making up that sentence, right? That's something that we study in syntax. This is how we work out that the sentence, the farmer chased the cow, is different than the sentence, the cow chased the farmer. The exception is what we call idioms, right? Expressions whose meaning cannot be worked out from the meaning of the word in that sentence. So in the metaphor, what we did is we used the meanings of the words in that sentence to make a new association. That is very different to idioms. Idioms are sentences that of course are made of words, but if we take the literal meanings of the words in that sentence together, it will not give us the actual meaning of what we're saying. So let me give you an example. The whole 9 yards. Okay. So what do we mean by the whole 9 yards? We mean everything. Okay. How about 2 peas in a pod? We mean maybe 2 people who are very close. So if you think about 2 peas in a pod, if an English language learner were to read that sentence, 2 peas in a pod, they wouldn't be able to understand that what is actually meant is, it's a saying to say that 2 people are very close. A dime a dozen, meaning that it's very sort of unique, or you don't really often find that particular thing. Okay, so notice how the meaning that is represented by these sentences doesn't come from the literal meaning of any of the words in that sentence. It is, so we call it non-compositional. It doesn't come from the composition of the sentence. Instead, the meaning is something that has been assigned by a culture or community of people that speak these different idiomatic phrases. So to sort of show you the difference in the way in which idiomatic meanings can differ across cultures, I want to show you some idioms that come from different countries. These that are listed right here are those that are universal English idioms. You're going to find these in all English-speaking countries, not just the US, but countries such as England, India, South Africa, Jamaica, right? All of the different countries that speak English. Okay, now I'm going to show you some localized English idioms. And again, this is to really show you or demonstrate how idioms are very, very culturally specific. Okay? So the origin of these idioms is English. They all come from an English-speaking country, but they come from different English-speaking countries. So I'm going to see if you can figure out the meaning. Okay. So India, if somebody were to say out of station, what do you think it might mean? It actually means out of town. In England, when somebody says all mouth and trousers, right, you could probably guess what that might mean. Or maybe not. Maybe you'd get it wrong. And if you were to get it wrong, that would make sense because you don't live in that community which assigned the meaning onto that idiom. But it means somebody who boasts a lot. Australia, if you have somebody who says on the wallaby track, what that means is it's unemployed, that person's unemployed. In Jamaica, there's an idiom that says rain falls but the earth is hard. And what that idiom means is that times are tough. Okay, now I have a third set that I want to show you. These are idioms that are written in other languages, but I've translated them for you here, just to show you how different cultures in different countries have different perspectives on things and have assigned these unique meanings to these phrases. Okay, so in Russia there is an idiom that says something like "not hanging noodles on your head." What that means is not kidding. In German, "to live like a maggot in bacon" means to live in luxury. Spanish, like "fingernail in dirt," is sort of the equal of "two peas in a pod," so it's like well suited or very close. In Arabic, "do good and throw in the sea." What that means is unappreciated or wasted effort. And the last one, "squeezer of lines," in Hindi means somebody who invites themselves, sort of like a self-invited guest or somebody who idles. Okay, so again, this is just to exemplify the fact that some idioms are adopted universally, and some are adopted locally within and between countries because of the assigned meaning that they've sort of given a phrase. So if you were to read any of these translated idioms, or maybe even the localized English idioms, you wouldn't be able to work out the meaning even just from the words. Even as English speakers, right? What is required is a cultural understanding or living in that community to sort of learn the assigned meaning that's been given.